The morning felt perfect, too perfect. And that's when my stomach twisted and I made a decision that would change all our lives forever. Before the story unfolds, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and comment where you're watching from, because this story takes a turn no one saw coming. The smell of butter and cinnamon pulled me out of sleep before my alarm even had a chance to buzz. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming. My husband never cooked, not breakfast, not dinner, not even microwave popcorn, without asking me how long it needed. So when I opened my eyes and heard the faint clink of plates downstairs, my first thought wasn't gratitude. It was confusion. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening. The sound was deliberate, not rushed. Whoever was moving around the kitchen was taking their time. Like this moment mattered. That's when the feeling crept in. Not fear exactly, more like awareness, the kind you get when something doesn't fit the picture you've been living in. When I walked into the kitchen, he turned around so fast he almost dropped the spatula. "Morning," he said, smiling too wide. The kitchen looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Freshly squeezed orange juice in a glass pitcher, eggs plated neatly with chives sprinkled on top, pancakes stacked perfectly, steam still rising. My favorite mug was already filled with coffee, just the way I liked it, cream, no sugar. "For me?" I asked. He nodded, wiping his hands on a towel. "You deserve it." That sentence should have made me melt. Instead, my chest tightened. We'd been married 11 years. 11. And in all that time, he'd never once made me breakfast without a reason. Birthdays came with store-bought pastries. Anniversaries came with reservations he forgot to confirm. Random Tuesdays, nothing. So why now? I forced a smile and sat at the table. "What's the occasion?" He shrugged. "Can't I just do something nice for my wife?" I watched his hands as he poured more coffee into his own mug. They were shaken, slightly, but enough that I noticed. He avoided my eyes, busying himself with small tasks that didn't need doing, straightening napkins, adjusting plates already aligned. I took a bite of pancake. It tasted incredible, sweet, fluffy, perfect, and still, that feeling didn't leave. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said. "You, like a rock." That was a lie. I knew because I'd been awake at 2:13 a.m. when his phone buzzed. I hadn't looked at it, something stopped me, but I remembered the way he turned over quickly, shielding the screen. I pushed my plate away slightly. "I don't think I can eat all this." He stiffened. "You don't like it?" "No, I do. It's just a lot." He stared at the food, jaw tight. "I made it for you." That's when the bad feeling hit me fully, sharp and undeniable. It wasn't about the food anymore. It was about him. His tone, the expectation behind it, like he needed me to eat it. "I have a meeting this morning," I said slowly. "I'll take it with me." Relief flickered across his face, too fast for him to hide. "Good idea." I packed the breakfast neatly into a container, every move deliberate. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were racing. By the time I grabbed my keys, my decision was already made, even if I didn't fully understand why. At work, the office buzzed like always, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, voices blending into that familiar corporate hum. My husband worked 2 floors above me, same building, different worlds. As I walked past the front desk, I saw her. Claire, his secretary. She looked up from her computer and smiled. Bright, polished, effortless, the kind of smile that lingered just a second too long. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," I replied, lifting the container slightly. "Have you eaten?" She shook her head. "I skipped breakfast." Busy morning. The bad feeling pulsed again, stronger now. My heart started beating faster, but my voice stayed calm. "My husband made too much," I said. "I hate wasting food. Would you like it?" Her eyes widened. "Oh, that's so sweet of him." She took the container eagerly. "Thank you." "Of course," I said, watching her carefully. "Enjoy." I walked away before she could say anything else. My legs felt heavy, like I was moving through water. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was tired, that this was nothing. But less than 30 minutes later, everything changed. A scream echoed down the hallway. People rushed past my desk, whispers flying like sparks. "Call 911. She collapsed." "Oh my God, she's not breathing." My blood ran cold. I stood up slowly, already knowing who it was before anyone said her name. Claire. And in that moment, as I stared toward the chaos gathering near the elevators, one horrifying thought screamed louder than everything else combined. What did my husband put in that breakfast? The hallway was a blur of bodies and noise, but I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor as people crowded around Claire's desk. Someone had laid her flat on the carpet. Another employee was on the phone with emergency services, voice shaking as she tried to explain what was happening. I could hear Claire gasping, shallow and panicked, like she was trying to breathe through water. Move back. Give her space. I recognized the voice of our floor manager. Chairs scraped, papers scattered. Someone cried quietly near the copy machine. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. Every instinct told me to run over there, to see her with my own eyes, but fear rooted me in place. Not fear for her, fear of what seeing her might confirm. I'd given her that breakfast, handed it to her with a smile. Had I just poisoned someone? A paramedic burst through the elevator doors with a stretcher, followed by another carrying equipment. They moved fast, practice.com, in a way that made everything feel more real. One of them knelt beside Claire immediately, checking her pulse, shining a light in her eyes. What did she eat? One of them asked loudly. Silence. People looked at each other, confused, helpless. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry. She had breakfast, someone said finally. I think the paramedic nodded. Do you know what kind? My hands started to tremble. I clenched them into fists under my desk, nails digging into my palms. This was the moment where I could speak up, where I should speak up. But what would I say? My husband made it. My husband, who never cooks. My husband, who needed me to eat it. I stayed silent. They lifted Claire onto the stretcher. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused, terrified. As they wheeled her toward the elevator, her gaze landed on me, just for a second, long enough for something to pass between us, confusion, maybe, or recognition. Then she was gone. The office fell into an uneasy quiet, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. Work didn't resume. No one could concentrate. Clusters of people whispered, speculating, replaying what they'd seen. I sat down slowly, my legs barely holding me. My phone buzzed. A text from my husband. How's your morning going? I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. Anger rose up, hot and sudden, followed by fear so intense it made me nauseous. I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another message came through. Everything okay? I imagined him upstairs, sitting at his desk, pretending to work, pretending this was a normal day, pretending he hadn't carefully prepared that breakfast, watched me pack it up, and smiled when I said I'd take it with me. I stood up abruptly, grabbing my bag. I'm stepping out, I told my coworker, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. She nodded absently, still shaken. No one questioned me as I headed for the elevators. The ride up felt endless. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked pale, eyes wide, like a stranger staring back at me. By the time the doors opened on his floor, my hands were shaking openly. I walked straight toward his office. Claire's desk was empty now, her chair slightly crooked, a half-empty cup of water still sitting there. The sight of it made my stomach twist. He looked up as soon as I stepped in. There you are, he said, smiling. I was about to come check on you. I closed the door behind me and locked it. His smile faltered. What's wrong? You tell me, I said quietly. He frowned. What are you talking about? Claire collapsed, I said, watching his face closely. Ambulance took her. The color drained from his face so fast, it was impossible to miss. He sank back into his chair. What? He whispered. You didn't know? I asked. He swallowed hard. No, I had no idea. I took a step closer. She ate the breakfast you made. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. He looked up at me slowly, eyes wide. What? I gave it to her, I said. I didn't eat it. His reaction was wrong. Not concern, not shock, something closer to panic. Why would you do that? He snapped, standing up suddenly. That was all I needed to hear. I felt something inside me break open, clarity rushing in like cold air. Why does it matter? I asked. If it was just breakfast. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. You should have told me. Told you what? I pressed. That I didn't eat it. Why would that matter? Unless stop, he said sharply. I crossed my arms, my heart hammering. Unless you expected something to happen. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the office outside the door felt unreal, like we were sealed off in a bubble where the truth was finally cornered. She's allergic, he said finally, his voice low. Allergic to what? Peanuts. I stared at him. You know she's allergic. He hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. She mentioned it once, he said. I forgot. You forgot, I repeated. But you remembered how I take my coffee. You remembered chives on the eggs. You remembered cinnamon in the pancakes. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Did you put peanuts in that food? I asked. No, he said quickly. Too quickly. Of course not. Then why are you sweating? I asked. A knock sounded at the door, making both of us jump. Sir, a voice called from outside. HR needs to speak with you. He looked at me, fear flickering in his eyes. Real fear now. This isn't over, I said softly, as he opened the door and stepped out. My phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Claire is stable, but the doctors say if she'd eaten more, she might not have survived. My knees buckled. I sank into his chair, staring at the desk where family photos sat neatly arranged. Our wedding picture. Smiling, happy, unaware. I realized then that whatever my husband had planned for me that morning, I had narrowly escaped it, and the worst part, I still didn't know why. I didn't go back to my desk after that. I couldn't. Every surface in that office felt contaminated. Like the walls themselves had overheard too much. I left the building without telling anyone, my badge dangling uselessly from my hand, the autumn air outside hitting my face like a slap. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. My phone rested in my lap, screen dark, but it felt heavier than it should have. Claire was stable. That sentence looped in my head again and again, each repetition carrying a different meaning. Stable meant alive. Stable meant questions. Stable meant this wasn't going to disappear quietly. I drove home on autopilot, barely remembering the turns. When I pulled into the driveway, his car wasn't there. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made my skin crawl. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning. The kitchen was still spotless. The trash had been taken out. The sink was empty. It was like a crime scene that had been scrubbed before anyone realized a crime had occurred. I opened the refrigerator. There it was, a small plastic container tucked behind the milk carton. Chopped peanuts. My hands went numb. I stared at it, my mind scrambling for excuses, explanations, coincidences. We weren't a peanut-free house. We didn't keep strict rules about food, but we also didn't use peanuts, often especially not in breakfast foods, especially not in pancakes, especially not when my husband knew someone with a severe allergy. I closed the fridge slowly and leaned against the counter, my legs shaking. Was this about Claire? Or was it about me? The question terrified me more than anything else. I replayed the morning in painful detail. His smile, his insistence, the way he watched me pack the food, the relief on his face when I said I'd take it with me. Had I misread it? Or had I been closer to death than I realized? My phone buzzed again. A text from him. HR wants a statement. I told them I don't know what happened. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled through our messages from the past few weeks. Small things jumped out now, glowing red in hindsight. Late meetings, missed calls, vague explanations, a sudden interest in cooking videos on his tablet ones I'd noticed but brushed off. Another buzz. Are you home? I locked the door. Minutes passed. Then more. I sat at the dining table, staring at the wood grain like it might spell out answers if I looked hard enough. When I heard his key in the lock, my heart jumped into my throat. He stepped inside cautiously, like someone entering a room where a fight had already happened. You left work, he said. Yes. Why? I stood up. You tell me. He sighed, rubbing his temples. You're overreacting. I laughed, a short, sharp sound that surprised both of us. A woman nearly died. She's fine, he said quickly. She almost wasn't. Silence stretched between us. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge, pulling out the container of peanuts and setting it on the counter between us. What's this? I asked. His eyes flicked to it, then away. Peanuts, he said. Did you put these in the breakfast? No. Did you use the same utensils? He hesitated. That's enough, I said. That's all I needed. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. You don't understand. Then explain it to me, I said. Explain why you suddenly decided to cook. Explain why you were upset I didn't eat it. Explain why your secretary ended up in an ambulance. His face hardened. Lower your voice. No, I said. I've been quiet for years. I'm done. That's when he said it. I needed things to change. The words landed like a blow. What does that mean? I asked. He looked at the floor. I'm drowning. Okay, I'm stuck. Everything is the same every day. So you poison people. I shot back. He looked up sharply. It wasn't supposed to go like that. My blood ran cold. What was supposed to go like? I whispered. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands were shaking now. I just wanted an out, he said finally. I didn't think an out from what I demanded from me. Tears filled his eyes, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no sadness, just a hollow, terrifying clarity. I didn't know you'd give it to her, he said. That wasn't part of it. That was the moment everything inside me snapped into place. You wanted me to eat it, I said. He didn't answer. You wanted me to eat it, I repeated, my voice shaking now. You knew I don't have allergies. You knew it wouldn't look intentional. Just a reaction. A tragedy. He finally looked at me. I never wanted to hurt you. I laughed again, louder this time. You just wanted me gone. He reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't touch me. I was desperate, he said. I didn't see another way. I felt sick. This man, this stranger, I'd shared a bed with him, shared a life, trusted him. And Claire, I asked, what about her? His face crumpled. She wasn't supposed to be involved, but she was, I said, because I trusted my instincts. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in. You're going to tell the truth, I said. He shook his head. You can't prove anything. I stared at him, realizing how carefully he'd thought this through. No witnesses, no obvious poison, just food, an allergy, plausible deniability. But he'd forgotten one thing, me. I don't need to prove it today, I said quietly. I just need to survive long enough to make sure you never try this again. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Where are you going? He called. Somewhere safe, I said. And tomorrow, I'm talking to a lawyer. His face went white. As I stepped outside, the cool air filled my lungs, grounding me. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if anyone would believe me. But I knew one thing with terrifying certainty, that breakfast wasn't an accident. And if I'd ignored that bad feeling, I wouldn't be standing here at all. I didn't go to a friend's house. I didn't go to a hotel. I went somewhere I hadn't been in years, my sister's place, 2 hours away, the kind of drive that gives your thoughts too much room to breathe. I didn't call ahead. I didn't explain anything over the phone. I just showed up, eyes swollen, hands shaking, carrying a bag I'd packed in under 5 minutes. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside and locked the door behind us. You're safe, she said softly, like she was talking to a child. I wanted to believe her. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the breakfast plate, the steam rising, his smile, the way he'd said, you deserve it. I replayed the moment I handed the container to Claire over and over again, realizing how close I'd come to becoming a headline, a tragic accident, a devoted husband left behind to grieve. By morning, my phone had dozens of messages, from him, from coworkers, from HR. I ignored all of them except one voicemail from an unfamiliar number. This is Detective Harris. I'm calling in regard to the incident involving Claire Mitchell. Please return my call. My hands went cold again. I stepped outside onto my sister's porch before calling back, needing space, air, something solid beneath my feet. When the detective answered, his voice was calm, professional. He asked if I'd been at work when Claire collapsed, if I knew what she'd eaten, if I'd noticed anything unusual about her behavior earlier that morning. I told him the truth, carefully, all of it, except the parts that felt too raw to say out loud. I told him my husband made breakfast. I told him I didn't eat it. I told him I gave it to Claire. There was a pause on the other end. And why did you give it to her? He asked. I hesitated. I had a bad feeling. Another pause, longer this time. Did your husband know about her allergy? Yes, I said. The word came out steadier than I felt. He did. The detective thanked me and said someone might want to speak with me in person. When the call ended, I stood there staring at my phone, realizing there was no going back now. I'd crossed an invisible line. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was accusing my husband of something unthinkable. Inside, my sister handed me a mug of coffee. What's going on? She asked gently. I told her everything. By the time I finished, she was crying, not loud, not dramatically, just quiet tears sliding down her face. He tried to kill you, she said. The words sounded surreal, even coming from someone else. I don't know if he planned it that way, I said weakly. She set the mug down hard. He made food knowing someone had a deadly allergy and pressured you to eat it. What part of that is unclear? I didn't answer. That afternoon, I got another call, this time from Claire's sister. She'd somehow gotten my number. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just asked me to tell her exactly what happened. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. They found traces of peanuts, she said finally, on the utensils, on the plate. My chest tightened. Is she okay? She's going to recover, she said. But she'll never be the same. She went without oxygen too long. They don't know yet what the long-term effects will be. Guilt crushed down on me like a weight. I'd trusted my instincts, yes, but I'd still handed that food to someone else. Someone innocent. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I know, she said. I don't blame you, but I need you to be honest with the police. I will, I said. I promise. That night, my husband showed up at my sister's door. We were eating dinner when the doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the room like a knife. My sister looked at me, instantly alert. Stay here, she said, already moving toward the door. I followed anyway, my heart pounding. Through the peephole, I saw him. He looked smaller somehow. Tired, desperate. I know you're in there, he called. Please, we need to talk. My sister opened the door, just enough to block the frame with her body. You need to leave, please, he said. She's my wife. She's my sister. My sister shot back, and she's asked you to stay away. He looked past her, his eyes finding mine. I made a mistake, he said. I panicked. You didn't panic, I said, my voice shaking but loud enough. You planned. He flinched. You don't understand the pressure I was under. What pressure justifies this? I asked. What pressure makes poisoning someone okay? He dropped his gaze. I never thought it would go this far. That's the problem, I said. You thought at all. Sirens sounded in the distance. Not for him at least, not yet, but the sound made him tense. They're investigating, I said. You should get a lawyer. His eyes snapped back to mine. So should you. I already am. That was a lie. But it wouldn't be for long. He stood there for a moment longer, like he was hoping I'd change my mind, soften, come back. When I didn't, he finally stepped away. As my sister locked the door, my legs gave out. I slid down against the wall, sobs ripping out of me uncontrollably. Not because I missed him, not because I doubted myself, because I realized how close I'd come to trusting the wrong person one last time. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with every detail. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. You did the right thing leaving, she said, and you need to understand something. I looked at her. If Claire had died, she continued, and you had eaten even a portion of that food before giving it away, you might have been the one under suspicion. The room went quiet. He didn't just endanger you, she said. He positioned you. The realization hit me harder than anything else so far. He hadn't just tried to get rid of me. He'd tried to make me take the fall. And suddenly, surviving that breakfast felt like only the beginning of a much longer fight. After meeting with the lawyer, I sat in my car for nearly an hour without turning the engine on. The parking lot buzzed with normal life, people walking in and out of offices, laughing, arguing on phones, living in a world where breakfast was just breakfast and marriage wasn't a potential crime scene. I felt like I'd crossed into a parallel reality and couldn't find my way back. The lawyer's words echoed in my head. He positioned you. That idea burrowed deep, changing everything it touched. The container, the timing, the way he let me walk out the door carrying that food. If I'd taken a bite, just one, before giving it to Claire, the story would have written itself. A shared breakfast, an accidental exposure, a wife who unknowingly brought contaminated food into the office. I drove back to my sister's house in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. When I walked in, she took one look at my face and knew something had shifted. What did the lawyer say? She asked. That I was almost framed, I said quietly. She didn't respond right away. She just nodded once, like she'd been bracing for that answer. That evening, a detective came to the house. Detective Harris, the same voice from the phone, sat across from me at the kitchen table, with a small recorder between us. He asked me to start from the beginning. Not the breakfast, not the collapse. The beginning. So I told him about the past year. The emotional distance, the late nights, the subtle ways my husband had pulled away while insisting everything was fine. I told him about the financial stress he'd been under, the performance review he'd failed, the whispers of layoffs. I told him about the messages I'd once seen pop up on his phone from Claire, nothing explicit, but familiar enough to make me uncomfortable. Did you ever confront him about her? The detective asked. Yes, I said. He said I was imagining things. And did you believe him? I hesitated. I wanted to. The detective nodded, scribbling something in his notebook. I told him about the peanuts in the fridge, about the relief on my husband's face when I said I'd take the food, about the panic when he realized I hadn't eaten it. When I finished, the detective turned off the recorder. We've spoken to Claire, he said carefully. My heart jumped. How is she? She's awake, weak, confused. but she remembers eating the breakfast. I swallowed. What did she say? She said your husband watched her eat. The room seemed to tilt. What do you mean? I asked. She said he came by her desk shortly after she started eating, asked how it was, asked if she felt okay. I closed my eyes. I could see it now. Him standing there, smiling, waiting. He left right before she collapsed. The detective continued. Security cameras confirmed that. My sister swore under her breath. That's not an accident, I said, my voice barely audible. No, the detective agreed. It's not. After he left, the house felt too quiet. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Courtrooms, headlines, my name tied forever to his. That night, I dreamed I was sitting at the kitchen table again. The pancakes were in front of me. This time, I took a bite. The room blurred. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The next morning, I filed for a restraining order. It felt surreal, sitting in a courthouse hallway filling out forms about the man I'd once trusted with my life. I checked boxes describing fear, imminent harm, intentional poisoning. Each word felt heavier than the last. My phone buzzed while I was waiting. A text from him. I know they're talking to you. Please don't destroy our lives over a misunderstanding. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. There is no misunderstanding. Do not contact me again. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I loved you, he finally wrote. I didn't respond. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called. They searched his office, she said, and his computer. My stomach dropped. What did they find? Draft emails, she said slowly. Unsent, to HR, to you, even to Claire. What kind of emails? Exit strategies, she replied. Financial projections, life insurance references. The word insurance rang in my ears like an alarm. There's more, she added. He'd increased your policy 3 months ago, significantly. I felt sick. That evening, I finally cried, not in sharp, panicked bursts, but deep, aching sobs that felt like they came from somewhere older than this crisis. I cried for the marriage I thought I had, for the version of myself who believed love was protection, for Claire, whose life had been altered because of a choice I'd made in seconds. And I cried because I realized something else, something just as terrifying. If I'd brushed off that bad feeling as nerves, if I'd eaten that breakfast without questioning it, he wouldn't be sending texts right now. He'd be planning a funeral, and everyone would be telling him how lucky he was to have loved me so much. The restraining order was granted the next morning. Temporary, they called it, but seeing my name and his on the same document with the words credible threat printed in black ink made everything feel permanent in a way I wasn't ready for. My lawyer warned me that this was only the beginning. Investigations moved slowly. Intent was hard to prove. People like my husband, educated, respected, well-spoken, rarely fit the picture others had in their minds of someone capable of something like this. That's what scared me the most. I stayed at my sister's, sleeping in her guest room, with the door locked, a chair wedged under the handle like I was a teenager again. Every sound outside made my heart race. Every unfamiliar car passing the house sent a spike of panic through me. My sister installed extra lights, checked the locks twice a night, and never left me alone longer than necessary. I hated that my life had shrunk to this. 2 days later, Detective Harris called again. We need you to come in, he said. There's something you should hear. At the station, he led me into a small interview room and set a tablet on the table between us. My lawyer sat beside me, one hand resting lightly on my arm. The detective pressed play. It was audio from a voicemail. My husband's voice filled the room, low, controlled, almost gentle. Claire, I just wanted to make sure you're feeling okay after breakfast. You didn't look well when I stopped by. Call me when you can. I felt my stomach drop. That message was left 8 minutes before she collapsed, the detective said. My lawyer leaned forward. So he was monitoring her condition. Yes, the detective replied, and there's more. He played another recording. This one was from weeks earlier, a conversation my husband had recorded on his office phone, apparently without realizing it was being saved. It has to look natural, my husband's voice said. Another voice responded in clear, distorted. I can't risk my career over this, my husband continued. If she's gone, everything resets. Insurance, assets, freedom. I just need one clean exit. I stopped breathing. The recording ended. That's not enough on its own, Detective Harris said carefully, but combined with the food, the allergy, the policy increase, and his behavior afterward, it paints a picture. A picture of a man I barely recognized. When I left the station, reporters were already outside. Someone must have leaked something. Cameras flashed. A microphone was pushed toward my face. "Did your husband try to poison you?" Someone shouted. I didn't answer. My lawyer guided me through the crowd, shielding me until we reached the car. My name was already spreading, twisted into headlines and speculation. Victim wife, suspect, survivor. By that night, his company placed him on administrative leave. By the next morning, he was arrested. I wasn't there when it happened. I heard about it through a news alert on my phone. Local executive taken into custody in workplace poisoning investigation. No names yet, but I knew. I sat on the edge of the bed, shaking, not from relief but from the weight of it finally becoming real. That afternoon, Claire's sister called me again. "They're charging him," she said. "Attempted murder, for both of you." I closed my eyes. "How is she doing?" "Some days are better than others," she replied. "She has memory gaps, panic attacks, but she keeps asking about you." "About me?" I whispered. "She wants to talk to you," her sister said gently. "When you're ready." I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready. The guilt was still there, heavy and unrelenting. But I agreed. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and quiet fear. Claire looked smaller than I remembered, her skin pale, dark circles under her eyes. When she saw me, tears filled hers immediately. "I'm so sorry," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I never meant." She shook her head weakly. "You saved your own life," she said, "and probably mine too." "I gave you the food," I whispered. "You trusted your instinct," she replied. I ignored mine. She told me she'd felt something was off that morning too. The way my husband lingered, the way he asked too many questions while she ate, the way his eyes never left her plate. He wanted confirmation, she said, not affection, not concern. We sat in silence after that. Two women connected by the same man's betrayal in different ways. When I got back to my sister's house, there was an envelope taped to the door. No return address. My name written in handwriting I knew too well. Inside was a letter. He wrote about pressure, about fear, about mistakes. He wrote that he never meant for things to go this far, that he loved me in his own way, that if I testified, I would ruin him. The final line made my blood run cold. "If you had just eaten the breakfast, none of this would be happening." I turned the letter over to the police that night. As the trial date approached, I started therapy. Nightmares still woke me up, but slowly, the panic attacks lessened. I learned to trust my instincts again, not just the one that saved my life, but the ones I'd ignored for years. On the day of the preliminary hearing, I sat in the courtroom and watched him enter in cuffs. He didn't look at me at first. When he finally did, there was no anger in his eyes, only calculation. And I realized something then, something chilling and clarifying. That breakfast wasn't the beginning of his plan. It was just the moment I stopped playing my role in it. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a strange mix that made my stomach churn. I sat behind my lawyer, hands folded tightly in my lap, forcing myself to keep my posture steady. Every instinct screamed at me to shrink, to disappear. But I stayed where I was. I'd spent too many years doing the opposite. When he took the stand, the room went quiet. He looked smaller in the suit they'd given him, like the fabric didn't quite fit the man he thought he was. His hair was neatly combed, his expression carefully neutral. If someone didn't know the story, they might have mistaken him for any other professional caught in an unfortunate misunderstanding. That was the most dangerous thing about him. The prosecutor walked him through his background, education, career, marriage. He answered smoothly, confidently, the same way he always had at dinner parties and family gatherings. I watched the jurors' faces, searching for signs of doubt, suspicion, recognition. Some of them nodded along, others avoided looking at him altogether. Then they moved to the morning of the incident. "Why did you decide to make breakfast that day?" the prosecutor asked. He paused just long enough to seem thoughtful. "I wanted to do something nice for my wife." I felt my jaw tighten. "Had you done this before?" she asked. "Not often," he admitted, "but I was trying to make an effort." An effort, the word burned. "And were you aware that your secretary, Claire Mitchell, had a severe peanut allergy?" "Yes," he said calmly. "I was aware." The prosecutor stepped closer. "So can you explain why traces of peanuts were found on the utensils used to prepare that breakfast?" He frowned slightly, as if offended by the question. "I can't. We use peanuts in our home sometimes. Cross-contamination is possible." "Is it also possible," she pressed, "that you intentionally contaminated the food?" "No," he said firmly, "absolutely not. I looked at his hands. They weren't shaken, not even a little. When it was my turn to testify, my legs felt like they might give out as I stood. I swore the oath, my voice barely audible at first. Then I started talking about the smell of cinnamon, about his smile, about the feeling in my gut that told me something was wrong. The defense attorney tried to trip me up. You didn't see him put peanuts in the food, did you? No. So this is just a feeling you had. It was more than a feeling, I said. It was a pattern. He raised an eyebrow. A pattern of what? Manipulation, I replied. Control and planning. He scoffed softly. Planning to what? Surprise you with breakfast. I met his gaze. Planning to make my death look like an accident. There was a murmur in the courtroom. The judge called for order, but I could feel the shift. The words were out there now, hanging in the air where they couldn't be taken back. When Claire testified, the room seemed to hold its breath. She moved slowly, supported by a cane, her voice trembling but determined. She described the tightness in her chest, the dizziness, the way my husband had stood there, asking if she felt okay while her vision blurred. I thought he was concerned, she said. Now I know he was checking to see if it worked. He finally reacted then, just a flicker, a tightening around the eyes. The judge denied bail that afternoon. Outside the courthouse, the press waited again. This time, I stopped. My lawyer squeezed my arm, but I shook my head. I trusted the wrong person, I said into the microphones, and I almost paid for it with my life. I'm speaking now because silence protects the wrong people. That night, alone in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling and felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Relief. Not because it was over. It wasn't. But because the truth was no longer mine to carry alone. Weeks passed. Therapy sessions, court dates, long conversations with my sister about rebuilding a life from scratch. I filed for divorce, froze our shared accounts, changed my phone number. Little acts of reclaiming control, one by one. Then one evening, my lawyer called with news that made my blood run cold. He wants to make a deal, she said. A deal, I repeated. He's offering to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for avoiding a full trial. My hands clenched. And what does he want from me? Your silence, she said gently, and a statement that you don't believe he intended to harm you. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. He still thinks he can manage the story. Yes, she said, and that's why this matters. I thought about the letter he'd written, about that final line, about how close I'd come to not being here at all. I won't do it, I said. I won't lie for him. There was a pause. Then my lawyer said, I was hoping you'd say that. The next morning, I woke up without fear for the first time in months. Not because I felt safe yet, but because I felt certain. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to be quiet. And he was finally going to face what he'd tried so hard to avoid, the truth. The trial moved forward after I refused the deal, and with it came a strange sense of momentum. Things were happening whether I was ready or not, whether I wanted them to or not. Evidence deadlines, witness lists, motions filed and argued in rooms I never entered. My life had been reduced to exhibits and timelines, and yet every detail felt carved into my bones. The prosecution's case grew stronger by the day. Forensic experts confirmed the peanut residue wasn't accidental cross-contamination. It was concentrated in specific items, applied deliberately. An insurance investigator testified about the policy increase, the timing, the beneficiary structure. A financial analyst laid out my husband's mounting debt, his failing investments, the pressure he'd been under to maintain a lifestyle he could no longer afford. Motive means opportunity. I sat there listening, realizing how carefully he'd built the trap. Then the defense shifted tactics. They painted me as emotional, unstable, a wife jealous of her husband's close working relationship with his secretary. They suggested I'd imagined the threat, exaggerated the danger, even implied that I'd handed the food to Claire out of spite. That hurt more than I expected. Sitting there, hearing strangers question my character, my sanity, my motives, it brought back years of being subtly dismissed at home, years of being told I was overthinking, too sensitive, dramatic. But this time, I didn't shrink. When they asked me on cross-examination why I'd given the food away, I answered plainly, because my body told me not to eat it. There were a few snickers from the gallery. The defense attorney smiled thinly. So you're saying this is all based on intuition? No, I said. I'm saying intuition saved my life. The judge sustained the objection before he could respond. Later that week, something unexpected happened. The prosecution called a witness I hadn't known existed. A former colleague of my husband's took the stand. He looked nervous, glancing at the jury, then at my husband. I didn't come forward sooner because I didn't think it mattered, he said. But after seeing the news, I realized it did. He explained that months earlier, my husband had joked during a late night at the office about how easy it would be to make someone's death look accidental using allergies. A joke. The prosecutor asked. That's what I thought at the time, the witness said, but he went into detail. Too much detail. My husband stared straight ahead, expression unreadable. The courtroom felt colder after that. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from fear but from anger. A slow, burning anger at how many warning signs I'd ignored, how many excuses I'd made for him. The next morning, my therapist asked me something that stopped me cold. If your best friend told you this story, she said, what would you tell her? The answer came immediately, that it wasn't her fault. Saying it out loud loosened something inside me. Midway through the trial, Claire testified again, this time about the aftermath, the memory loss, the anxiety, the fear of eating anything she didn't prepare herself. Her voice broke when she talked about how her sense of safety had been taken from her. I trusted him, she said quietly. We all did. The jury listened, really listened. When the defense rested, my husband finally took the stand in his own defense. He spoke about stress, about feeling trapped, about loving me but feeling like he was failing at everything. He never once apologized. Not to me, not to Claire. Instead, he framed himself as a man pushed too far. Watching him, I realized something profound. He wasn't sorry. He was inconvenienced. On the last day before closing arguments, I received a message from a woman I didn't recognize. She said she'd been following the trial closely. I left my husband last year, she wrote. Your story helped me trust myself. Thank you. I stared at the message for a long time, tears blurring my vision. For so long, this story had felt like a nightmare I wanted to wake up from. But now I saw it differently. It was a warning. Not just to me but to anyone who'd ever ignored that quiet voice inside them because someone else told them they were wrong. As the jury filed out to deliberate, I held my sister's hand and felt steady. Whatever verdict came back, I knew one thing for certain. I had already survived the worst part, and I wasn't going to let him define the rest of my life. The waiting was worse than the testimony. Once the jury disappeared behind those heavy wooden doors, time seemed to lose its meaning. Minutes stretched into hours. Every sound in the courthouse, the shuffle of papers, the cough of a bailiff, the murmur of voices down the hall felt amplified, like my nerves were exposed and raw. I sat on the same hard bench, my hands clasped together so tightly my fingers ached. My sister sat beside me, her knee pressed against mine, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. My lawyer reviewed notes she no longer needed, more out of habit than necessity. Thought across the room. My husband sat with his defense team. He didn't look at me, not once. He stared straight ahead, jaw set, like this was just another meeting he needed to get through. That, more than anything else, told me everything I needed to know. Hours passed. The judge left the bench. The courtroom emptied and refilled. At one point, I went to the restroom and barely recognized my reflection. My eyes looked older, sharper, like someone who'd seen behind a curtain she was never meant to pull back. I thought about the life I'd had before that breakfast, the small arguments, the compromises, the moments I'd told myself were normal, forgivable, manageable. I wondered how many other women were sitting somewhere right now, ignoring that same quiet alarm inside them because it felt rude or dramatic or inconvenient. When the bailiff finally announced that the jury had reached a verdict, my heart slammed so hard I thought I might faint. Everyone stood as the jurors filed back in. I counted their faces without meaning to. 12 strangers who now held the weight of everything in their hands. The 4 persons stood. In the matter of the state versus, she said his name, clearly, steadily. My breath caught in my throat. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree. The pause felt endless. We find the defendant guilty. The room seemed to tilt. I heard a sound, half sob, half gasp, and realized it came from me. My sister wrapped her arms around me as my knees nearly gave out. Tears streamed down my face, hot and uncontrollable, not from joy but from release, from the crushing pressure finally lifting. The judge continued reading the verdicts. Guilty on multiple counts, aggravating factors confirmed, sentencing to follow. My husband finally turned to look at me then. For the first time since the trial began, there was no calculation in his eyes, only disbelief. As officers moved toward him, he opened his mouth, like he wanted to say something, apologize, explain, blame. Me. He never got the chance. They placed him in handcuffs and led him away. The metallic click echoing through the courtroom like a final punctuation mark. I didn't feel triumph. I felt exhausted. Outside, the press surged forward again, but this time I didn't stop. I walked past them, head high, my sister's hand firm in mine. I owed no one my pain. I'd given enough. Sentencing came weeks later. The judge spoke about betrayal, about premeditation, about the irreversible harm done to two women who had trusted the same man for different reasons. He spoke about deterrence, about accountability. Then he sentenced my husband to a long prison term. As the gavel came down, I felt something close to Pest, not because justice fixed everything, but because it drew a line, a clear, undeniable line between who I had been and who I was becoming. Afterward, Claire and I sat together on a bench outside the courthouse. The sun was warm, the sky painfully blue, like the world hadn't noticed what we'd just been through. I still can't eat pancakes, she said quietly. I still can't smell cinnamon, I replied. We shared a sad, understanding smile. But we're here, she said. Yes, I agreed. We are. The divorce finalized quickly after that. There wasn't much to divide. Most of what we'd built had been an illusion anyway. I kept the house, though I eventually sold it. I couldn't live in a place where every corner held a memory of how close I'd come to disappearing. I moved into a smaller apartment across town. Sunlight poured through the windows in the morning. I bought new dishes, new furniture. I cooked meals just for myself, slowly learning to enjoy food again without fear. Therapy became less about survival and more about rebuilding, trust, boundaries, forgiveness. Not for him, but for myself. One afternoon, months later, I found the old breakfast container tucked away in a cabinet I hadn't opened in a while. For a moment, my heart raced. Then I took a deep breath and threw it away. Some things don't deserve space in your future. I started speaking at small event support groups, community centers, sharing my story with people who needed to hear it. Not the sensational parts, the quiet ones, the feeling, the instinct, the moment of choice. And every time, someone came up to me afterward with tears in their eyes and said the same thing. I thought I was the only one. I always told them the same thing in return. You're not, and you're not crazy. Listen to yourself. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that morning, about how ordinary it looked, about how easily I could have ignored that bad feeling just to keep the peace. But then, I remind myself of something else. That feeling wasn't fear, it was self-respect finally finding its voice. And because I listened, I got to live. Not just survive, but live. The months after the trial were surreal. Freedom came with a new weight. The responsibility of rebuilding a life that had been shadowed for so long by betrayal and danger. I moved into a new apartment, one that didn't carry the echoes of that morning. And I slowly filled it with pieces of myself I'd set aside for years: books, photos, plants, small things that reminded me who I was before the manipulation and fear. Claire and I remained close. Our bond had been forged in crisis, but it grew into something steady. We shared coffee on quiet mornings, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence, other times talking through therapy sessions, doctor's visits, and the lingering shadows of panic that both of us carried. We celebrated small victories together: her first full meal without fear, my first night sleeping without waking in terror. Even with all this, every now and then, I'd feel a flicker of doubt or fear, the kind that comes when you know how easily trust can be broken. I'd catch myself scanning the crowd at a grocery store, glancing over my shoulder, replaying the past in tiny, precise detail. But each time, I reminded myself, the past had ended, I had survived it. Work was another chapter. I switched companies, moved into a department that valued transparency and ethics. I learned to assert myself in meetings, to speak up when something felt off, to trust my instincts professionally as much as personally. My confidence grew, not as a shield, but as a core part of who I was becoming. I also began volunteering, speaking at women's support groups, sharing my story to warn others about the subtle signs of manipulation, the quiet, insidious ways someone can build a trap. I didn't talk about the sensational parts, the near poisoning, the trial, the custody of documents, but about the feelings, the intuition, the moments when trusting yourself makes all the difference. People listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes crying, and I felt the quiet power of those stories ripple outward. Then, one day, a letter arrived at my apartment. No return address. The handwriting was familiar. My heart sank for a moment, then steadied. I didn't open it immediately. I left it on the counter, letting it sit while I finished dinner, a ritual I'd started to reclaim normalcy. Eventually, I opened it cautiously. It was from him. He wrote about regret, about trying to apologize, about wishing things had gone differently. He admitted nothing new, nothing actionable, just words designed to tug at old emotions. I read it once, twice, then set it aside. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I didn't need to. His ability to manipulate, to control, was over. The courtroom had ended that. The law had ended that. And most importantly, my own voice had ended that. Life continued, fragile and beautiful in its own ways. I celebrated my birthday with friends for the first time in years, laughing without restraint, enjoying the flavors of a cake I baked myself. I traveled alone, small weekend trips at first, then longer adventures, places I'd always wanted to see, doing things I'd always wanted to do. Each day was a reminder that I could claim joy without guilt or fear. There were moments of quiet reflection. I'd sit by the window, looking at the sunset, and think about that morning breakfast. How ordinary it looked, how extraordinary it became, how one small instinct, the feeling in my gut that told me not to eat, had saved me. It reminded me that life is precarious, but intuition, awareness, and courage can be powerful shields. And one day, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The shadow of that morning no longer controlled me. I had learned to trust my instincts, value my safety, and demand respect in every area of my life. I had reclaimed the narrative. My story was mine to tell, mine to live, mine to shape. I still thought about the people affected: Claire, my family, even him in his own way, but I didn't carry the burden anymore. I had moved forward. Each step was mine, each breath mine, every decision mine. And as the sun set over my city, casting warm light across my apartment, I smiled quietly to myself. The fear that had once threatened to consume me was gone. In its place was clarity, strength, and an unshakable trust in myself. The breakfast had been a turning point, but surviving it had given me something far greater: a life fully, unapologetically lived, a life where no one could ever control me again, a life where I was finally free, and that, freedom earned, hard won, and absolute, was mine forever.